Rick Gonzalez, Vice Chairman of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the ACHP. I'm honored to be joined here today by three individuals who will be telling us about an exceptional public-private partnership that is responsible for breathing life back into the historic buildings at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Leavenworth, Kansas, a national historic landmark. I have with me today Tom Boss, Chief of Strategic Management and Planning at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Rick Kready, Senior Vice President of Operations of the Pioneer Group, Inc., and Steve Jack, Executive Director of the Leavenworth County Development Corporation. Thank you all for being here with me today. The ACHP has released its Leveraging Federal Historic Buildings Working Group final report. This working group was convened by the ACHP former chairwoman, Amy Giorgiani, and tasked with identifying obstacles in the leasing and use of non-federal partners of federal historic buildings, not needed in the near term by federal agencies, known as outleasing. The group made up federal and non-federal partners has developed recommendations for overcoming these obstacles to promote the productive use of the nation's historic federal buildings. The final report serves to advance the ACHP's larger mission, which is to promote the preservation, enhancement, and sustainable use of the nation's diverse historic resources. The partnership at the Leavenworth VA Medical Center that we are highlighting, referred to within VA as an enhanced use lease, is the subject of the success stories that is included in the final report. We hope that sharing this success will motivate others to consider outleasing as a viable option for advancing historic preservation efforts when accomplishing mission goals, such as providing affordable housing for veterans. So again, welcome to you all, and thank you for sharing your story. I'd like to begin by asking Tom Boss to tell us a bit about the VA's nationwide Enhanced Use Lease program. What's the history of this national historic landmark, and how did the buildings at Leavenworth VAMC come to be outleased?
Good morning, Vice Chairman Gonzalez, and to everyone on the call this morning. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to have this opportunity to be able to speak with you. A little bit of history about the Dwight D. Eisenhower VA Medical Center. It originally existed as a home under the National Homes for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. This was in place from 1885 until 1930. Then, in 1930, Congress authorized the President to consolidate and coordinate government activities affecting our war veterans. The home became one of a number of field stations which were merged into the new federal government agency commonly known today as the Department of Veterans Affairs. Immediately following World War II, the Leavenworth VA Medical Center was operating in excess of about 1,000 beds in general medical and psychiatric care, with an average of about 814 veterans in our domiciliary care. The VA eventually closed the domiciliary in 1944 and changed the mission of the Leavenworth VA to help those soldiers returning from World War II with psychiatric issues. In 1946, the VA again changed the mission to medical care and reopened the domiciliaries. Along with 10 other branches, it represents the beginnings of the nation's healthcare system for volunteer soldiers and sailors. The branch's cemetery expanded over time to become the Leavenworth National Cemetery, which attaches to the VA Medical Center today. The Topeka campus has about 100 buildings with modern and historic on approximately 343 acres. Together with their landscaping, 54 of the buildings comprise the National Historic Landmark District. By 1999, many of the buildings were no longer utilized and had fallen into disuse. This was mainly due to the transforming our delivery of care model from a healthcare system with a large inpatient programs and extensive length of stay to outpatient programs supported by better outpatient treatments and therapies and better medications. In today's world, our outpatient programs and treatments far exceed our inpatient programs. We are able to provide our veterans the same level of care while they remain at home with their families and minimal interruptions to their basic lives. Because of the shift in the way we delivered care, we suddenly had a surplus of buildings that we no longer needed and didn't have the funding to support the deferred maintenance and utility cost. Prior to entering our enhanced use lease, that's commonly known as our EUL, we considered demolishing 38 of its historic buildings to make way for the expansion of the National Cemetery. Then under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, VA consulted with the Leavenworth County Historical Society, the Kansas Preservation Alliance, the Preservation Association of Leavenworth, the Kansas State Historic Preservation Office, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation to find ways to preserve and use these buildings. In the end, we were able to find ways for the cemetery expansion to continue to provide burial options to veterans for the next 30 years without destroying any historic buildings. To this day, approximately 90% of the buildings on the Dwight D. Eisenhower campus have historic value. Our current 150-bed domiciliary complements the EUL veteran housing program by providing veterans discharged from the domiciliary housing with supportive services necessary to assist our veterans with their transition to the community. We have created a veteran community within the community and are proud to be a part of one of VA's largest and most successful enhanced use lease programs. Because of our 2005 lease, it is not limited to just supportive housing. It also allows us the ability to consider other areas of use as long as it is not in a direct conflict with our VA mission. As an example, the Dwight D. Eisenhower VA's EUL has provided space for the VA Central Plains Consolidated Patient Account Center, employing more than 450 VA employees. And our EUL is currently being considered as a site for a Kansas State Veterans Home using these historic buildings. Our 2005 lease agreement also allows for new development using the 50 acres included in the EUL, and I believe there is also the ability to use EL ground at the Grand Island VA Medical Center.
Yes, thank you. I have a follow-up question too. It's amazing, so many historic buildings on so many acres. What condition were the buildings in before the project started? Could you share a little bit about that?
That's an excellent question, Vice Chairman. As you may imagine, all 38 buildings identified in the UL were suffering from various states of deferred maintenance. The buildings had remained vacant long enough that moderate to severe deterioration had occurred to the extent that none of these buildings were habitable in their current condition. Our utilities had been disconnected to most buildings, and barriers had been erected around some of the buildings to prevent unauthorized entry and to limit our VA's risk and liability. And because these buildings sit on top of one of Kansas's highest elevations, the wind was obviously mercilessness to the roofing and exterior, which eventually led to roof leaks and interior damage from the roof leaks. Our current staffing and funding levels were not enough to be able to keep the buildings secure or to be able to minimally preserve the buildings. And considering the harsh weather conditions in Northeast Kansas, it wasn't long before significant deterioration had consumed the buildings. Our only option would be to shift our general purpose funding into these buildings, which we couldn't do because that would in turn reduce our funding for services needed by our veterans.
Thank you, Tom, for the answer. I'm going to follow up now with Rick Kready. Rick, you represent Pioneer Group, the developer who partnered with the VA, signing a 75-year lease in 2005. Well, that's a long time, right? For the rehabilitation of up to 40 buildings. Could you talk about that process and what you have been working on during the first 15 years of this lease?
Absolutely. This has been a great honor for us to get the opportunity to work with this. When the VA had to make some choices, tough decisions about about how they were going to spend their funds, rightly so, they decided they needed to spend the funds on veterans rather than on saving buildings that were empty or certainly underutilized. Our company, Pioneer Group, had done some other historic preservation in the area, So some of the preservationists in Leavenworth contacted us to have us take a look. The VA worked with us. We determined that the enhanced use lease, the EUL, was a real alternative, and we decided to take it on. 38 buildings. You asked, what have we been doing the last 15 years? We've not been twiddling our thumbs much. We have now fixed up 30 of those 38 buildings.
Wow.
Through the use of the historic tax credit, that has made us some real opportunities. Some of what we have done, and Tom also mentioned that the current EUL authority that the VA is using really only applies to supportive services for veterans or for homeless veterans. We do have one of those EULs also in Nebraska. But this one that we signed in 2005 in Leavenworth was before the VA made that change. And we basically have the right to use those buildings for anything, as long as it doesn't conflict with the VA's mission. So one of the buildings, the mess hall building, a 66,000 square foot building that could seat 1,000 veterans at a time, with a ballroom upstairs, a stage at the end where Bob Hope and others entertained. We converted that to office space for 425 people. So it's not just been for veteran housing, but frankly, the rest of what we've done, we turned domiciliary buildings, dormitory-like buildings, into apartments. And naturally market those to veterans. There's a lot of veterans that come and go from that VA campus from the medical center. And so really we don't even have to advertise it. We always have a waiting list and move people in. They've got quality housing. They can walk down the street to the VA medical center. So out of those 38 buildings, 30 of them have been completed. The historic tax credit has made it so that it's been very economical. The federal tax credit is 20%. We also now have a state tax credit that is an additional 25%. When you add that up, that's 45% of the construction costs that can be paid through the federal tax credits. So we're able to lease those buildings to others, to rent those buildings to others at very competitive rates and give them a quality building.
Thank you for your comments. Steve Jack, you represent the Leavenworth County Development Corporation. Can you tell us about your organization's involvement with the project and what impacts it has had on the surrounding community?
Sure. Thank you, Vice Chairman Gonzalez. First, let me just say, as you've heard, some indications from Tom and Rick, that the community of Leavenworth has been involved since the beginning of the process. Leavenworth calls itself the first city of Kansas because it was, in fact, the first city established in the state in 1854, which was 27 years after Colonel Henry Leavenworth established Fort Leavenworth here. So there are citizens here in the community who are proud of their roots and committed to preserving the memory and legacy of the past while moving into the future. And this effort became a perfect example. The Leavenworth County Development Corporation, LCDC, of which I work, and our companion development agency, Leavenworth County Port Authority, were established to grow the economy of Leavenworth County. So of the 38 buildings being renovated, the one that we were particularly interested in was the, as Rick described, the former 66,000 square foot mess hall building. The Pioneer Group were converting it into office space, which they hope to bring the VA Central Plains Consolidated Patient Account Center, or CPAC for short, which would bring more than 400 new jobs to Leavenworth. It would be one of the largest economic development projects for our community with a payroll of over $20 million. But these projects depend on several factors to be successful, and one that would make it a competitive lease for the VA was Pioneer's use of state historic tax credits. On the last day of the legislative session in 2009, the Kansas legislature was looking for some loose change and eliminated the historic tax credits, which meant that we were unlikely to get that project. So Heather Morgan, who was the county administrator at the time, came to me with an idea to get the county, the city, and the Port Authority to pool our resources and reduce the renovation costs for Pioneer and costs associated with building a parking lot on the hill just west of the building. And so each party committed to $500,000 to the project over 10 years in $50,000 annual increments. And so the total contributed by the community partners was $1.5 million, but it only cost each of the three partners $50,000 annually. So we each wrote our last checks last year. And after the CPAC's 10-year lease came to an end at that same time, they extended the lease for another 5 years, and they continued to employ 400 people from Leavenworth, Lansing, Basehor, Tonganoxie, and the surrounding counties as well. Initially, the construction jobs and materials sold through local providers amounted to millions of dollars. Certainly, the VA still benefits through good quality housing for veterans, and the city benefits from the added jobs and related incomes for that are being spent on groceries and other products sold locally. So it literally means millions of dollars for our local community. So our economic development organization was excited at the beginning of this process, and as it is firmly established in our community, even more pleased now.
Thank you, Steve. What a great, I always love stories about local involvement, right? And stretching your dollars like that. I think I'm going to copy some of those ideas down here in Florida. Right. Rick, I want to come back to you. I understand that the building rehabilitations under this lease have been the recipients of several awards. By the way, congratulations on that. Could you speak to some of the recognition this project has received and what plans you have for the future here?
Sure can, thank you. Yes, frankly, I looked the other day to try to come up with a list of my awards, and I'm not sure, I don't think I could actually list all of them, which is a great problem to have, a little embarrassing. The 30 buildings that we have restored at this point, that's really only been in 4 projects. We did, 16 in one project, and a couple in another, and 6 in another. But out of those 4 projects, so on these 30 existing ones that we have completed, we've won 8 awards that are national, regional, and statewide. In addition to that, we've certainly gotten some local recognition as well, but the Eisenhower Ridge Apartments was the first one we did. We took staff housing and turned them into apartments, and that one won the award from the Kansas Preservation Alliance. They called their award for excellence, so the best historic preservation project in Kansas in the year 2007. That CPAC building, that won 3 national awards, 1 regional award, plus that same statewide award. Ridgetop Apartments, where we took some domiciliary buildings then and fixed those into additional apartments, which primarily are for veterans. That one won the statewide. We just completed Ridgetop 2. We were slated to get the statewide award for it, and it was canceled. The award ceremony was canceled for the pandemic. So I think we'll be getting it, but one of these days. In addition to that, we've got some additional projects that are on the drawing board. Always have some additional ones. Some of them might come to fruition, some of them might not, but we're hoping to bring some others along, and it's kind of become a tradition now to win an award while we're at it.
That's wonderful, Rick. I'm sure your conference room has a lot of things on display. Tom, I'd like to come back to you now, and I would like to ask you, why should federal agencies, such as the VA, participate in outleasing? And also, what is the benefit of the agency and our nation of putting these buildings back into productive use?
I consider the Enhanced Use Lease program an important component of both VA's mission to end veteran homelessness and the department's overall asset management program. An Enhanced Use Lease provides us the mechanisms for a non-VA entity to develop and operate supportive housing for homeless and at-risk veterans and their families on VA property. VA enters into a long-term ground lease with a private, not-for-profit or local government entity who develops, builds, finances, operates, and maintains the housing. Through this innovative tool, veterans are provided with both housing and an expanded range of services that would otherwise not be available on a medical center campus. VA's EUL program and implementation process also aligns with the Housing First philosophy. So since 1991, VA has executed 101 EULs, which include 48 operational housing EULs nationwide, comprised of more than 3,100 units of housing. VA housing EULs have raised over $500 million of private sector capital. These EUL projects provide safe, affordable living arrangements near healthcare providers, which helps us contribute to positive healthcare outcomes for our veterans. EULs can only be for the provision of supportive housing that engages tenants in on-site and community-based support services, with the sole exception of what Rick's been doing with his 2005 EUL. The supporting housing must be for veterans and their families that are at risk of homelessness or are homeless, and that may include permanent housing, transitional housing, single room occupancy, congregate living housing, independent living housing, assisted living housing, or other modalities of housing. We, and when I say we, I mean the VA, conduct periodic reviews of its real property portfolio to identify vacant and underutilized buildings and land parcels that could be repurposed as supportive housing under the EUL program. If we were to expand possibilities beyond that veteran housing, the possibilities from where I sit are unlimited to what we can accomplish through the public-private partnerships and maintain the historical value of our buildings.
Thank you very much, Tom. Tom, Rick, and Steve, I appreciate you all sharing the success of the public-private partnership at Leavenworth VAMC with us. It sounds like a lot of great work is being accomplished under this enhanced use lease, and I look forward to hearing about its continued success in the future. To all of you watching, thanks for joining us, and be sure to check out our final report of the ACHP Leveraging Federal Historic Buildings Working Group to learn more about outleasing.